The chase over Germany, March 1945. The sky above western Germany was the color of gunmetal, streaked with ribbons of smoke from the burning airfields below. Captain William "Red" Anders pushed his P-51 Mustang to the absolute edge of its limits, the control stick trembling like a nervous animal under his gloved hand. Ahead of him, less than 1,000 yards away but drifting farther with terrifying speed, the sharp, predatory silhouette of a Messerschmitt Me-262 jet flickered in and out of the sun. It was like trying to chase a lightning bolt. The jet's twin Junkers engines screamed with a sound that didn't belong to any propeller world. A metallic whirlwind tearing the air apart. Anders knew what everyone in the 8th Air Force knew. If a Me-262 got even a few hundred more yards of distance, the chase was over. The Mustang could dance, it could dive, it could climb, but it could not outrun a jet. Not this one. Red slammed the throttle forward until the metal-on-metal clank hit the firewall. Nothing. The Mustang surged, but only slightly. The 262 began to pull away. 500 yards. 600. 750. Fuel rattled in the tanks as the vibration increased. The cockpit smelled of hot oil and the faint metallic tang of burning cordite from his last burst. The canopy glass shimmered with faint frost at its edges. His heartbeat thundered louder than the roaring V1650 Merlin engine. "Come on, girl," he muttered through clenched teeth. "We're not losing another one." But physics didn't care. The Me-262's wings banked, sunlight flashing across its aluminum skin, and the jet simply glided away, effortless, impossible, untouchable. Red felt the hopelessness crawling up his spine, the dark realization that every pilot in the squadron had learned the hard way. You cannot catch a jet in a prop plane. You can only ambush it. His finger hovered uselessly over the trigger. The gap stretched to 900 yards. He should have broken off. He should have dived. He should have accepted reality. But then the Mustang coughed. A sudden, deep, throaty surge shook the entire frame. The nose jerked upward a fraction. RPM spiked. Manifold pressure jumped like it had been kicked. The engine wasn't supposed to sound like this. It wasn't supposed to behave like this. Anders had forgotten something. Something a mechanic had told him barely 40 minutes earlier on the tarmac at St. Trond airfield. "Trust me just once. Use the mixture setting backwards, rich when you'd normally go lean, lean when you'd normally go rich. I know it sounds insane, but try it." He'd laughed. Every pilot had laughed. But in desperation, with a jet slipping from his grasp, Anders flicked the switch to the backwards combination. And now, the Mustang lunged. The change was small, barely noticeable at first. Just a growl, a deeper pull, a note in the engine's voice that wasn't there before. But then it happened. The distance stopped increasing. Then it shrank. 800 yards. 700. 650. Red blinked. This wasn't real. This wasn't possible. But the Mustangs behind him saw it too. He heard the stunned voices in his headset. "Red, what the hell are you doing? Why's your speed climbing? What the are you gaining on a jet?" The Me-262 pilot realized it a moment too late. He banked hard left, engines roaring. But Red stayed glued behind him like a hunting wolf. The impossible had happened. For the first time in his life, Captain Anders was catching a jet. And all because of a ridiculous, mocked, backwards engine setting invented by a mechanic no one took seriously. A mechanic named Staff Sergeant Eli Mercer. And this insane moment over the ruined skies of Germany was only the beginning, because in 1 week, using this forbidden setting, Mustangs would bring down 8 Me-262s. And history would never remember the man who made it possible. The morning of March 28, 1945, began like any other at WWII, gray, cold, and buzzing with the low growl of engines warming up. But for the men who maintained the 352nd Fighter Group's Mustangs, something had changed. A quiet rumor, a whisper of possibility, drifted through the maintenance tents. "Pretty's trick actually worked. Did you hear? They caught jet boys yesterday. One Mustang went past 450 in level flight." Most dismissed these murmurs as typical wartime hangar gossip, exaggerations of exaggerations, and pure fiction. But the handful of pilots who had flown with the mysterious reverse setting the day before knew the truth. The Mustang's engine wasn't supposed to do that. The Mustang wasn't meant to do that. But now maybe it could. The pilots start asking questions. Lieutenant Jack Donovan, a hotshot pilot from Boston with a grin sharper than his combat record, walked straight into the maintenance bay and slammed his glove on George Preddy Jr.'s workbench. "Sergeant," he said, trying to sound casual, "whatever the hell you did to my power unit yesterday, do it again." Preddy didn't look up. He was elbow-deep inside a carburetor, adjusting a float assembly with surgical precision. "I didn't do anything illegal," Preddy said slowly. "Illegal is my department," Donovan replied. "You just make the horse run fast." Preddy smirked. For months, pilots had bragged about their kills, about their flying skill. But today a pilot had come to thank the mechanic. That was new. And it was only the beginning. The first official test. Major Ben Crandall, one of the squadron's senior officers, finally approached Preddy that afternoon. He didn't joke. He didn't smile. He carried a clipboard and wore the look of a man who didn't want to believe what he had heard. "Sergeant Preddy," he said with the sternness expected of someone in his rank, "you're being ordered to demonstrate this push setting to the officers." Preddy froze. "Sir, what I did, it was just accidental tinkering. I'm not even sure. You made a Mustang catch a Me-262 during exit. That alone is reason enough. The Mustang couldn't normally catch a jet. Not in climb. Not in dive. Not in level chase. But the setting Preddy discovered bypassed the normal fuel regulator pathways for a fraction of a second. Just enough to dump extra fuel and increase manifold pressure beyond the design limits. Not safe. Not approved. But effective." "Sir," Preddy said carefully, "it will stress the engine. Maybe break it." Crandall leaned in. "Son, we're fighting aircraft that shouldn't even exist. I'll risk an engine. You show us what you know." Preddy nodded. The secret meeting in the hangar. Just after dusk, under blackout curtains and the flicker of 2 dusty lanterns, the test began. 3 officers. For pilots. 1 terrified mechanic. Preddy leaned over the throttle quadrant of a grounded P-51, pointing at the subtle detents. "This here," he said, "is the spot where the governor catches the fuel flow. But if you pull the throttle just past the notch and hold the mixture at rich, but slightly back, you get a temporary surge." Donovan frowned. "Temporary meaning?" 3 seconds, Preddy answered. Crandall wrote that down. "And what happens after 3 seconds? The engine cooks itself," Preddy said plainly. "Or detonates." Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then Donovan grinned again. 3 seconds is enough to kill a jet. The high command gets involved. By the next morning, the experiment had leaked. Not officially. Not through paperwork. Not through memos. Through the oldest intelligence system in military history. Pilots talking too much. Within 2 days, the group commander wanted to see results. Within 4 days, the 8th Air Force had been informed that a low-level sergeant in the 352nd might have found a way to temporarily increase P-51 top speed by more than 40 miles per hour. Preddy received a visit from 2 stern-faced engineers carrying notebooks filled with regulations. "Sergeant," the taller one asked, "did you deliberately override a military-approved limiter?" Preddy held his breath. "I discovered a manufacturing quirk." The engineer blinked. "A quirk?" "Sir, the Mustang's engine wants fuel. The limiter stops it. If the limiter is made to hesitate, just for a second, the engine takes what it can." The engineers exchanged looks. One whispered, "It's theoretically possible." The other muttered, "The kid shouldn't have found it." The week of 8 kills. From April 1st to April 7th, 1945, the skies over Germany erupted into chaos. The Me-262s launched multiple interception attempts against the bomber streams. They were fast, deadly, and nearly untouchable. Nearly, because now Mustangs had something new. Not a better engine. Not a better weapon. A better mechanic. Kill 1, April 1st, 1945. Lieutenant Donovan, spotting a Me-262 accelerating out of a turn, activated Preddy's push for the first time in combat. The Mustang lurched. The engine screamed. The speed indicator spiked. He fired at 300 yards. The jet pilot never saw him coming. Kills 2 to 3, April 2nd. A pair of 262s tried to outrun Lieutenant Harris's squad. Bad choice. Kill 4, April 3rd. Captain O'Malley caught one during its landing approach, a tactic the Allies used often but never at that speed. Kills 5 to 6, April 4th. A high-altitude sweep. A jet dove. A Mustang followed and kept up. Kill 7, April 6th. Preddy's setting allowed a Mustang to fire a burst into a fleeing 262 at almost 480 miles per hour. Kill 8, April 7th. The final kill of the week came from Lieutenant Donovan again. He chased a jet through broken clouds, held the setting for almost 4 seconds, and downed it before his engine seized. He landed with smoke pouring from his exhausts. When he climbed out, he pointed at Preddy and shouted, "This kid just changed the war." The bureaucratic nightmare. Success never comes without consequences. Within 48 hours, Washington sent orders. All unapproved engine overrides are to be terminated immediately. The pilots protested. The officers petitioned. But policy was policy. Preddy was called into the commanding officer's office. "Sergeant," the commander said, "we appreciate your service, but you've caused a doctrinal mess. Pilots are risking engines. Commanders are filing exceptions. Washington hates exceptions." Preddy swallowed. "So the setting is banned?" The commander nodded. "On paper, yes." Then he leaned closer. "But between you and me, pilots are still going to ask for it." The truth gets buried. When the war ended a month later, all technical reports related to Preddy's push vanished into the vast ocean of military paperwork. Because the war ended too quickly. Because the Mustang became obsolete overnight. Because no one wanted to admit a battlefield advantage came from an enlisted mechanic rather than a design bureau. Preddy returned home quietly, without medals, without recognition, without ever knowing that pilots whispered his name like a legend. He had helped defeat the world's first jet fighters. He had changed the dynamics of aerial combat. He had bent the laws of engineering with intuition alone. But like many wartime geniuses, his story faded. Until now. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. For most of the world, it was a day of trumpets, flags, and cathartic celebration. For Staff Sergeant George Preddy Jr., it was a day of silence. Not because he wasn't proud. Not because he didn't believe in victory. But because, as the crowds cheered, he sat alone on an overturned barrel beside Hangar 4 at Y-29, staring at a small toolbox that had been with him since he first shipped out. The skies were quiet now. No sirens. No scrambling pilots. No Me-262s slicing across the horizon like silver phantoms. Just wind. And memories. Behind him, mechanics laughed, hugged, and drank whatever cheap champagne they could find. Pilots swapped exaggerated stories of near-death escapes. Commanders shook hands, thanked their men, and planned the long journey home. But Preddy felt something different, a weight on his chest he didn't yet understand. Because he knew something the world didn't. His discovery, the thing that helped catch 8 jets in 7 days, would disappear. The report that never existed. On May 10th, 2 officers from the Air Technical Service Command arrived at Y-29 holding sealed manila folders stamped confidential. One approached Preddy. "You the mechanic who did the override?" Preddy hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Sign here," the officer ordered, holding out a form. Preddy scanned it. It wasn't an award, or a commendation, or even a letter of recognition. It was a non-disclosure compliance document, a bureaucratic muzzle. He looked up. "Sir, why is this necessary?" "Because," the officer said, lowering his voice, "we don't want every backyard mechanic in America thinking he can override a warplane's fuel governor." But it helped win. That's classified. Preddy swallowed hard, signed, and handed the paper back. "Good," the officer said. "Consider this matter closed." The giant that awoke too late. Weeks later, Preddy boarded a Liberty ship with his squadron. They sailed home to America, their Mustang engines left behind in scrap piles across Europe. The world was already rushing forward. Jet age, atomic age, Cold War, new aircraft, new doctrines, new priorities. Nobody cared about the brief moment when piston and jet clashed, when a single mechanic closed the gap with nothing but intuition and stubbornness. In the new America, Me-262s became museum pieces. Mustangs became airshow props. Mechanics became laborers in factories and motor shops. And George Preddy Jr. vanished into the margins of history. The man who saved pilots he never met. In the years after the war, Preddy returned to North Carolina. He worked at an automotive garage, fixing carburetors, cracked manifolds, and engines far simpler than the Merlin he once mastered. He married a schoolteacher, raised 2 daughters, lived quietly. He never bragged about the jets, never told neighbors that pilots once thanked him for their lives, never explained how his mind worked at 5,000 revolutions per minute, hearing things inside engines others couldn't. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit under the porch light, staring at an old P-51 maintenance manual. He would turn the brittle pages with the careful touch of a man turning sacred scripture, and he would whisper things like, 3 seconds. That's all she needed. She just wanted a bit more fuel. My Mustang could outrun anything. If his daughters heard him, they never understood. They never asked. How could they? The world had moved on. The forgotten file in the basement. 40 years passed. In 1986, during the restoration of an older military archive building in Dayton, Ohio, a contractor uncovered a metal filing cabinet sealed shut by rust. Inside, among crumbling ration reports and forgotten flight logs, a single envelope lay wedged between 2 drawers. On the front, 352nd Fighter Group, Engine Irregularities Report, March, April 1945. A historian named Dr. Alan Rourke opened it out of curiosity. What he found inside shocked him. Gear: a handwritten note describing reverse limiter hesitation. Gear test results showing temporary surges in manifold pressure. Gear: pilot testimonies of increased speed during jet pursuits. Gear: a technical diagram showing exactly what Preddy had done. Gear: a final stamped page. Unapproved. Discontinued. Barry. Rourke had seen thousands of routine technical records, but never one like this. He whispered out loud, "Who the hell was this mechanic?" The search for the man with no name. It took Rourke 6 months to track down the name George Preddy Jr. Took another 3 months to find his hometown. Another week to find the small house where he had lived. Another day to discover what happened to him. Preddy had passed away in 1979. A heart attack. Age 59. He never lived to see his discovery unearthed. Never heard historians debate whether his push was the last major mechanical innovation of the propeller era. Never saw the letters or testimonies of pilots he helped save. But Dr. Rourke met his daughters. He told them the story, showed them the documents, explained that their father hadn't just been a mechanic. He had been a battlefield engineer, a visionary, a man whose instincts rewrote the odds in the final desperate days of the war. The daughters cried, not out of sadness, but out of pride they never knew they were allowed to feel. The return of a lost legend. By the early 2000s, aviation historians re-examined the Me-262 kill records. Patterns emerged. Unusually fast Mustangs. Unusually aggressive jet pursuits. Unusually high manifold readings in pilot notes. It didn't take long for researchers to realize. These anomalies matched Preddy's push exactly. Documentaries were filmed. Articles published. Pilot diaries reread with new context. Interviews with old mechanics validated forgotten whispers. The truth finally reached the world. A 22-year-old American mechanic engineered the only consistently successful piston-to-jet pursuit method of World War II. And he did it without orders, without recognition, without reward, because he believed machines could always do a little more, if you dared to push them. The final irony. Today, at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, there is a display titled, The forgotten mechanic who beat the jet age. 2 artifacts sit inside the glass case. A worn, oil-stained P-51 throttle quadrant. Preddy's small metal toolbox, found in a family attic. Beside them is a single quote, engraved in brass. Engines talk. Most men never listen long enough. George Preddy Jr. Visitors stop. Read. Look confused. Most people know the names of pilots, aces, commanders. But here, under soft museum lighting, lies the story of a man who never flew. A man whose hands shaped victory. A man whose instincts bridged the gap between eras. A man who caught jets with a piston engine because he believed no machine was beyond understanding. The legend that disappeared in 1945 finally had a home. The morning of March 21, 1945 began with the kind of cold that cracked metal. Frost coated the wings of every P-51 on the tarmac at Y-29. Mechanics worked with numb fingers, knocking ice off flaps with wooden mallets, blowing into their palms to keep the blood flowing. The air smelled like kerosene and distant fire, the smell of a collapsing Reich. Preddy stood alone near Mustang 413D, his breath forming white ghosts in front of him. He was thinking about the previous day, the day Red Anders had used his backward setting and lived. He should have felt triumph. He felt dread instead, because once success spreads through a squadron, fear spreads even faster. He's trying to kill U.S. Major Donathan, Anders' squadron leader, stormed across the tarmac, his boots crunching frost with every furious step. "Mercer," he barked. It must be said, in this fictionalized retelling, we refer to our mechanic as Mercer following the plot arc you started. We'll reconcile with Preddy Jr.'s name later. Every mechanic in earshot froze. Mercer slowly turned. "Yes, sir?" Donathan jabbed a finger into his chest. "You nearly cooked a Merlin yesterday. You overloaded an intercooler. You risked engine failure mid-flight." Mercer didn't flinch. "It caught the jet, sir. That's not your decision to make." The major stepped closer, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're a mechanic, not an engineer. You don't innovate. You maintain. I'm trying to keep your pilots alive. And if your little trick fails once, they'll die horribly. Flames. Spins. No ejection seat." He leaned in. "You are done. Touch another carburetor, Governor, without permission, and I'll have you court-martialed." Mercer stared at him, the frost stinging his face, anger tightening his throat. "Yes, sir," he said, but he didn't mean it. The pilots know the truth. The briefing room at Y-29 felt like a church before service. Pilots sat quietly, almost reverently, waiting for the updated air intercept intel. The walls were plastered with reconnaissance photos, runways cratered by Allied bombing, Me-262 shelters camouflaged with netting, fuel depots burning. Captain Red Anders slipped into the back, moving slowly because his muscles still ached from the G-forces of yesterday's jet chase. He didn't take his normal seat. He sat next to Mercer. No one spoke for a moment, the room buzzing with low whispers. Then Anders leaned close. "You saved my life yesterday." Mercer kept staring forward. "That wasn't approved procedure." "To hell with approved." Mercer clenched his jaw. "They're shutting me down." Anders smirked. "Not if the squadron doesn't let them." He stood up. "Gentlemen," he said loudly, addressing the entire room. Every head turned. "I pursued a 262 yesterday. I didn't lose him. You know why?" The room went still. The engine setting Mercer came up with works. A few pilots nodded cautiously. Others whispered. One second lieutenant raised a hand. "Did your engine overheat?" "Only a little," Anders said. "But better a hot engine than a cold grave." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Another pilot spoke up. "It's our job to fight jets. They outrun us. If this gives us 30 more seconds of chase, that's 30 seconds we've never had." A third. "I trust my mechanic. I trust Mercer." In the back, an older captain muttered, "We're fighting for our lives, not for rulebooks." By the time the briefing began, a silent vote had already taken place. The pilots had chosen their side. The order no one expected. 2 hours later, an unexpected message arrived from higher up. Large-scale Luftwaffe jet sortie expected from Schweinfurt, Stuttgart, and Munich sectors. Interceptor squadrons advised. Do not engage jets in prolonged chase. The room erupted in frustration.
No pursuit.
So we just let them go? This is insanity. Major Donathan pounded his fist on the table. This is doctrine. You follow it. Mercer exhaled slowly. He knew exactly what they meant. Jets were too fast. Pursuing them was suicide. Doctrine forbade it. But doctrine never met Preddy's push. The strike that changed everything. At 1,400 hours, pilots strapped in. Engines roared. Wings glittered in the afternoon sun. Dust billowed behind the taxiing Mustangs. Mercer stood at the end of the runway, goggles on, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He watched each plane roll forward, each one carrying a tiny piece of his mind under its cowling. As Captain Anders' Mustang reached the threshold, he leaned out of the cockpit and shouted over the roar. If I catch another jet, you're buying the whole squadron around. Mercer laughed. Deal. Then he watched them lift off in groups of 4, climbing into the sky like silver spears. The jets arrive. 20 minutes later, the radio crackled alive. Bandits spotted. High. Fast. Multiple bogies. 262s. Another voice. Holy hell. They're everywhere. Another. They're going for the bombers. The Mustangs dove. The jets climbed. The sky turned into a 3-dimensional chessboard of death. Red leader. This is Blue 2. Pursuing a jet, but he's pulling away. Blue 2 break off. Doctrine says. Screw doctrine. Those 2 words triggered the moment that changed the war's final week. The second impossible chase. Red Anders rolled into a shallow dive, engine screaming at 61 inches of manifold pressure. He should have lost the 262 immediately. He didn't, because he flipped the mixture switch. The Mustang growled. A deep, throaty surge that tugged the cockpit forward. RPM spiked. Air screamed past the canopy. And for the second time in history, a Mustang began catching a jet. Red, you're closing. You're actually closing. Mercer, you mad bastard. It works. Keep it steady, Red. The gap shrank. Not fast, but enough. 200 yards. 100. 75. Red squeezed the trigger. 6.50 cal Brownings spat fire. Shell casings streamed out like burning bronze rain. The Me-262's right engine exploded in a blossom of orange flame. The jet spiraled, trailing smoke, and plowed into a field southwest of Mainz. The radio erupted with shouts of disbelief. One Mustang had caught a jet. Again. And this time, the whole squadron saw it happen. The beginning of the end. By the time the Mustangs landed, they were buzzing with adrenaline. Mechanics swarmed the fighters. Pilots jumped out, shouting, laughing, pounding Mercer on the back. Your setting saved my ass. I closed on a jet for the first time in my life. You're a damn genius. Not everyone was smiling. Major Donathan stood in the distance, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He hated losing control. He hated improvisation. He hated Mercer's violation of protocol. But he couldn't argue with results. Because that day, 3 Me-262s went down. Not by ambush, not by luck, but by pursuit. And all because of one mechanic who refused to accept limits. March 22, 1945. The sky begins to notice. Word traveled fast in wartime squadrons. Faster than mail. Faster than intelligence briefings. By sunrise the next day, pilots from the 354th, 353rd, and even the 361st Fighter Group were whispering rumors. Someone at WWII figured out how to make the Mustangs catch jets. That's impossible. No, really. They caught 2 already. What? Did they bolt rockets to the wings? No. Just a mechanic doing something illegal. The higher up the rumors climbed, the more unbelievable they became. By mid-morning, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance team intercepted Allied radio chatter confirming that 3 of their Mi-262s had been lost in dogfights. Kurt Welter, commander of the elite Commando Welter Jet Night Fighter Unit, slammed his fist on the briefing table. Propeller planes do not chase jets. Find out what trick they learned. But even he would not believe the truth when he heard it. The Mustangs go hunting. At 11:45 a.m., P-51s from WWII climbed into blue sky streaked with contrails. Their mission was routine: escort a formation of B-17s hitting rail yards outside Ulm. But every pilot on that mission had the same thought. If a jet appears, if even one 262 crosses their path, they would test Mercer's trick again. They wanted revenge. They wanted proof. They wanted history. But mostly they wanted to live. The ambush at 24,000 feet. They saw them at exactly 12:32 p.m. for tiny specks on the horizon, moving like thrown knives glinting in sunlight. Jets. 9 o'clock high. The B-17 gunners opened up first, tracers arcing upward like red-hot fireworks. The Mi-262s dove in perfect formation, aiming not for the bombers but for the escorting fighters. This was new. This meant the Germans were testing something too. Red leader. This is blue too. They're going for US. Break. Break. Take them head on. The sky turned into chaos. The 262s slashed through the formation like silver phantoms. 2 Mustangs rolled violently to avoid collision. A third clipped a jet's shockwave turbulence and went spinning. But then came the moment every pilot had dreamed of. One of the jets made a mistake. It leveled out too early after its attack run, flying straight for 3 long precious seconds. Captain Anders throttled forward. Mercer's trick. Now! The engine roared. The Mustang surged. The gap shrank. 250 yards. 200. 150. The German pilot finally realized the impossible. A Mustang was chasing him. He banked left. Red stayed with him. He dove. Red stayed with him. He firewalled the throttle, but the Jumo turbojets were slow to spool up after the dive. Red Anders wasn't. He closed the last 50 yards in a smooth, terrifying glide of inevitability. He fired. The jet exploded into a rolling ball of flame, spiraling into the clouds below. That's 3 in 2 days. The radio erupted with disbelief. Red, you crazy bastard. That's 3. 3 jet kills? In 2 days. Holy hell. I just saw it with my own eyes. Mercer needs a damn medal. But Mercer wasn't thinking about medals. Back at Y-29, listening to radio chatter, he just whispered, "Hold together, girl. Just a little longer. Just a little hotter. Just a little faster." He knew exactly how fragile his hack was. He knew every chase risked engine detonation. He knew one miscalculation would send a Merlin tearing itself apart in midair. But he also knew something else. It was the only way the Allies could hunt jets. And Germany had hundreds left. March 23rd. The day the jets hit back. The next morning, the Luftwaffe changed tactics. Instead of attacking bombers, Mi-262s began attacking airfields. Their goal was simple: find the squadron using the trick and erase them. Radar picked up fast-moving contacts heading straight for Y-29. The scramble alarm wailed. Pilots ran. Mechanics shoved Wilczeks aside with their boots. Engines fired up so fast the oil hadn't even warmed. Merlins coughed, sputtered, then roared. For Mustangs were airborne when the first jet appeared over the field. Captain Anders wasn't even buckled in yet when he rolled the plane onto its side and pitched up hard. Red leader airborne? Where's the bastard? Then he saw it. A jet diving straight at the fuel depot. If the depot blew, Y-29 would be wiped off the map. Red jammed the throttle. Come on. Come on. The 262 streaked past him, engines howling, and leveled off only 300 feet above the ground. Red hit the mixture switch. The Mustang leapt forward like a predatory animal freed from a cage. The jet pilot looked over his shoulder and physically jerked in shock when he saw the P-51 gaining. He banked. Red matched. He accelerated. Red closed in. 50 yards. 30. 10. Red fired a 1-second burst. The jet disintegrated in a fireball that tumbled across the grass, exploding short of the fuel trucks. Entire squadrons watched it happen. Ground crews stopped everything and stared. A Mustang had caught a jet. In a low-level chase, over an airfield. It was the most impossible victory yet. The commander who couldn't lie anymore. That night, Major Donathan found Mercer in the hangar alone, hands black with grease, replacing a cracked intercooler pipe from Anders' Mustang. The major didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't lecture. He simply picked up a wrench and started helping. After a long silence, he said, "Your fix saved the entire damn airfield today." Mercer kept working. "I told you engines talk," he said quietly. "You just have to listen." The major nodded. "From now on, you run the engine shop. Full authority. You override what needs overriding." Mercer froze, then nodded once, slowly. For the first time, someone with brass was on his side. March 24th to 27th. The last 4 jet kills. The next 4 days became legendary. In 4 separate missions. In 4 separate missions, a Lieutenant Hale caught a 262 trying to outrun a bomber formation. Captain Anders got his 4th after chasing one across the Rhine. A rookie pilot named Finley got his first kill ever, and it was a jet. And on March 27th, the trickiest interception of all. A 262 on landing approach was chased down from above, not below. Each time, Mercer's backward setting made the difference. Each time commanders grew more silent, more confused, more suspicious, because something impossible kept happening. Propeller planes were catching jets. By the end of the week, the scoreboard read, 8 Mi-262s shot down. In 7 days. By 1 squadron. Using 1 mechanic's forbidden hack. ***. Nothing like it ever happened again in history. Nothing like it was supposed to be possible. And nothing like it was ever officially recorded.